all of us have been intentionally deceived and harmed by Fauci, Daszak, all the rest of them. The question is, are we going to let them get away with murder? Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Chris Martinson of Peak Prosperity. Big update. You know, I've been on the trail of this for a very long time. Today, we're going to be discussing this bombshell, all the revelations that have come out of late around Fauci and Daszak, and all the rest of their co-conspirators who have actively sought to harm us. And I'm going to make the case. Now, you know, I've been on this for a long time, but what really brought this to head is that we have this congressional inquiry, and there's this congressional memo now outlining a conspiracy involving Fauci and others, where they conspired to break the law, commit felonies, to hide their communications, and in particular, all around all that stuff they wanted to do to try and hide the fact that there was a good chance, and I'm positive of it actually, that this COVID virus came out of a lab. So why were they so busy and interested in covering that up? Why would they not want to be honest about that? I think you and I know the answer to that. So the New York Post writes here, NIH advisor David Morins, who is the chief advisor and has been for 20 years to right-hand man of Anthony Fauci, says, you know, he can't recall if he deleted COVID records, and laughs off the Fauci FOIA evasions. And he's trying to, that's his defense. He's like, I don't remember. Well, folks, we got to press hard, because common knowledge is coming out. And these are the people who actively created this virus and then hid it. Right? They had a hand in all of that for sure in the creation of this virus, but then they went around hiding that fact and deluding us all and misleading us all. And that had enormous impacts. We're going to talk about that. First, in the New York Post article, they say here a top advisor to NIH deleted records critical to uncovering the origins of COVID-19. Deleted records is a crime. You can't do that. We've cited the actual Title 18 part here before. Can't do that, and it is illegal. And he used a secret back channel to help Dr. Anthony Fauci and a federal grantee that funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, evade transparency. Now, the NIH senior advisor, they say here, Dr. David Morins, they said improperly. I just scratched that word out and wrote in the correct word here, illegally conducted official government business from his private email account and solicited help from the NIH's Freedom of Information Act office to dodge records. I'm going to name names when we get there. And according to emails now revealed in a memo by the House Select, House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. So in yellow, all the way at the bottom, quote, I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. Morins wrote at February 24, 2021 email. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail. So, open admission of crimes. There's plenty enough here to indict this gentleman, obviously. So, from a couple of years ago, I was writing about how virologists were going into hyper cover-up mode, how the Fauci lab leak cover-up emails were all revealed. You can go back and revisit those programs there. It's all covered in pretty big detail. 4 years ago, I was talking about the evidence of lab leaks, so that's all matter of public record. But imagine this. Here's why it matters. Imagine if Fauci, instead of right there, as soon as this COVID thing is busting out, instead of saying, oh no, it had natural origins, and what if he had come out and said this? Look, world, American people, there's a good chance that this thing came out of a lab. And we know that because we were funding some research that was kind of like this, and we're sorry to say there's a chance that this might have spilled out and over. We know that there's this furin cleavage site. Good news, furin is a protease, and we know how to inhibit proteases. We also have other compounds that we knew about in the context of classic SARS back in 2003. We knew that hydroxychloroquine actually worked against the replication capabilities of SARS, so we're going to try that here. Very sorry. We don't yet know what all the impacts of this thing are going to be long term. We don't know. It's, lab leaks are terrible things, and we've never had a situation like this before with something with an R naught this high, scraping around the world, doing stuff. Obviously, it's going to hit some people harder than others. We already know that the old and the infirm potentially getting hit a lot harder, of course, but those generally who are sicker are going to be hit worse than those who are healthier. So we're going to do everything we can to get ourselves as healthy as possible. And I'm going to tell you about why I take vitamin D. Can you imagine? I mean, what if he'd said that out front? Like, we would have known, we would have been on alert that we were up against something, brand new. We would have really encouraged all of the scientists and doctors out there to begin being creative and observing and noticing things. Nope. Instead, they just slammed this down. Came from nature, and then they absolutely blocked, this gentleman here, absolutely blocked all inquiry into anything that could have been helpful. I think he deserves to be punished, and punished very, very harshly for that. Now, this was from 4 years ago on May 1st, 2020. I put out this one. It was titled Newsweek Bombshell, COVID-19 Virus Lab Made, Fauci Connected. So this was all out there a long time ago. In fact, I want to just take a couple of minutes from this one, and we'll go through this because, and let me make sure I've got let me turn this way up. So let's just listen in. This was just me riffing off of, this is that proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 is the paper that Fauci and his, I can't call them colleagues, and the assembled team of virologists, scientists, he assembled a bunch of people, none of them from within the NIH, to write this proximal origins paper. You can see the names there, Christian Anderson, right? You've got Andrew Rambeau, Ian Lipkin, Eddie Holmes, Robert Gary. So that's the cast of very, very dark people here. Not good, because they knew privately that this thing probably came out of a lab, but then they wrote this paper to throw everybody off the scent. Why? Let's listen in. I'm going to show you what a guy with an internet connection was able to, or the outcome. All right, there's a whole big long paper up here, and there's a lot of science above it, but here's where they got, this is the money shot in this particular paper. They said, while the analyses above suggest that SARS-CoV-2 may bind human ACE2 with high affinity, computational analyses predict the interaction is not ideal, and that the receptor binding domain sequence is different from those shown in SARS-CoV itself, classic SARS, to be optimal for receptor binding. Thus, the high affinity binding of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein to human ACE2 is most likely the result of natural selection on a human or human-like ACE2. Okay, all right. This is really bad logic. Let's break this down, because here's what they just said. Computational analyses predict that the interaction is not ideal, but actually it is a highly ideal binding arrangement. So what they're saying is, because our computers and our models that we're using couldn't have predicted that the sequence that we see is actually going to be a really good sequence, therefore it couldn't have been human derived, because our computers wouldn't have spit out that sequence, so we never would have tried that sequence. However, that's one way you can go about trying to create a virus. One way is you can try and create a computational sequence, and then you make that sequence, you put it in the virus, you test it. There's another way you can do this too, which is you can yank other sequences known to work, and you can insert them into parts, and you can also do gene editing, and you can do random mutations, and you can do other things where you can use the power of the laboratory to create all these random mutations, test them against cell lines and against binding assays, and then find one that seems to really work, and then use that sequence and amplify that and then put that back in. All they're saying here, which was a little weaselly, a little mealy-mouthed, they're saying because a computational analysis predict this is not an ideal binding, but it actually is. They're saying thus, the high affinity binding of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein to human ACE2 is most likely the result of natural selection. So yeah, that's not how any of this works. Because you can't, that's one conclusion. There's a second conclusion, which is, is there another way? Is there another way that we could go about monkeying with these genes rather than computing them? And there is. Of course there is. And so this is really faulty logic. I'm kind of surprised that made it into Nature. I really am, because usually the stuff is more well peer-reviewed than that. But again, if the other people peer-reviewing it happen to be other people who are conflicted about this whole thing and really wouldn't like it to be revealed that virologists and monkeying with viruses is a bad idea, and their paycheck depends on that not becoming a well-known fact, then I could see this sneaking through. But this is faulty logic to say because a computer didn't predict this or wouldn't have predicted this, therefore it didn't come from humans. All right, I'm going to show you why in just a second. So remember, All right, that was some weak sauce right there. Oh, our computers wouldn't have done this, so therefore it wasn't humans. That is obviously not how any of this went. And of course, the same people who were involved in this knew all about the Predict and the Diffuse programs, which said that they were going to take chunks of bat viruses and scramble them up and then run them in through cell lines and humanized mouse models in order to see if they could get greater affinity for these bat viruses to human tissue. And that's what they did. And they ended up doing that. So, of course, you show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome. The incentive here is these guys and gals were all deeply afraid that their jobs would go away, or that maybe they would get in trouble somehow, or the world would no longer think of them as these amazing rock stars. And by the way, these people, everybody I just mentioned as part of these virologists, they're a mean girls club, and they have the thinnest possible skins ever. They've blocked everybody who isn't like a complete toady sycophant for their point of view. They just can't stand criticism. Their egos are mile wide, but their thick skin is paper thin, right? So that's just how they roll. But they were obviously very deeply conflicted. These were not the people that we could trust. Obviously, they proved that they were untrustworthy because they came out and absolutely abused what I would call logic, reason, rationale, or science. Okay, so that's fine. So that's what's been going on here. Now, this is interesting. Back to the House of Representatives memo that they produced here. They said background on June 29th of 23. The Select Subcommittee sent Dr. Morens a request for documents. Hey, send them over. And pertinence to investigations from his personal email accounts. Personal, because I think they were already on the scent of this thing. So on November 20th, so that's June, July, August, September, October, November, like months later, right? In response to that letter, Dr. Morens produced approximately 2,000 pages of responsive documents to the Select Subcommittee. Okay. Excuse me. And these documents mimicked what Dr. Morens produced to the NIH during its investigation into alleged wrongful disposition of federal records. So the NIH is like, oh, we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. Okay. But then on December 22nd of 23 and in January 18th of 24, Dr. Morens then testified at transcribed interviews before the Select Subcommittee. At the interviews, Select Subcommittee counsel advised Dr. Morens that he was required, pursuant to Title 18, Section 1001 of the U.S. Code, to answer questions truthfully, including questions posed by congressional staff in the interview, and that if he knowingly made false statements, he could be subject to criminal prosecutions. And you know what he stated on the record? That he understood the requirement and the consequences of not complying with that requirement. So they got that all on record, and there he is. He's like, yep, I understand. I'm going to be totally truthful. You can trust me. I'm being totally truthful here. Then on April 16th of 24, the Select Subcommittee announced a subpoena to compel Dr. Morens to produce the remaining responsive documents from his personal email accounts. And on April 30th, now he's being responsive. In response to the subpoena, Dr. Morens produced approximately 30,000 more pages of responsive documents. Oh, did you mean these? I did not. Oh, you meant these? 2,000 pages on the first pass. And they bang on it a little bit. And he's like, oh, I found 30,000 more. What a scumbag, right? Oh, my goodness. So Title 18, Section 1001, after all the work I've done on the Great Taking, I've learned you go right to Cornell Law and you dig these things up because it's important. What is U.S. 18 Code Section 1001? It says, whoever in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch of the government if they knowingly or willfully falsify, conceal, makes materially false, fictitious, fraudulent statements, false writings, documents, if you lie or fail to deliver documents, you shall be fined under this title and imprisoned not more than 5 years. If the offense involves international or domestic terrorism, imprisoned not for more than 8 years, or both. I think this counts as a case of international terrorism, certainly domestic terrorism. Honestly, if you can be a terrorist for showing up at a PTA meeting and getting a little mouthy, I would think killing millions of people and helping to cover up that crime and trashing a global economy and ruining lives, that would have to count. Wouldn't you think? Getting angry at a PTA meeting, killing millions of people. Yeah, I can get an equivalence on that. I think those could both be considered kind of terroristic-y. So look at this stuff. So in their document, the Congressional investigators put this one out. Here's an April 21st, 2021 email from Dr. Morin's where he's writing here. And so David Morin's and, it's going to a couple folks there, right? He says, I can either send stuff to Tony, that's Tony Fauci, obviously, on his private email or hand it to him at work or at his house. See, I have the access. Hand it to him. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. But he emailed it. This is like, if you ever watch The Sopranos, this would be like one of Tony's sergeants, one of his main people saying, hey, Tony. Yeah, hey, listen, I know your lines could be tapped, so let's not talk about the hit on the other guy over the phone lines. It's just like, wow, what a moron Dr. Morin's is. Who knew? Okay. And then this is interesting. This is from David Morin's, and I'm going to pull out some names because I'm interested. So it went to, it went to Gerald Kush. It went to Rich Roberts and Peter Daszak. Now, I've beaten up on Peter Daszak plenty, deservedly so, right? But down there in the bottom, it said, I suggested to Arthur to interview Tony directly and connected him on our secret back channel. So he's actually speaking about obvious crimes here and criminality at this point. But I'm also interested, who are these other guys here? Because it's kind of how I roll in these things, I like to talk about all of it. So first one, very fascinating. This is Sir Richard Roberts here, and he's at New England Biolabs here. And this is interesting because you know what this guy does? The main arm of his whole thing that he does, Rebase, is to maintain a comprehensive filing of all genes and proteins associated with restriction modification enzymes. Now, we've talked about them before. You know what you do use restriction enzymes for? They make very precise cuts within DNA. You use them for gene editing. You use them on things like that's right. You use them if you're going to use these endonucleases. If you use these restriction, that's a restriction enzyme. The restriction enzyme fingerprint indicates a synthetic origin of SARS-CoV-2. It came from a lab. This was a great piece of work here by Brutel et al., Alex Washburn on there. This came out in 2022. And in their paper, they showed these fingerprints, right? I won't go into all the details, but that SARS-CoV-2 at the top, that fingerprint with only those 4 restriction sites up there, you'd never find this. You would never find this in nature. Just never. I mean, it's so unthinkable. Now, scientists are more cautious than that. I'll tell you, this 100% came from a lab. SARS-CoV-2 came from a lab because of its restriction enzyme use. And isn't it funny that one of the first people that they're circling the wagons with is the Sir Richard restriction enzyme specialist nuclease guy here? Okay, so in layman's terms, this is what Alex Washburn's paper said here. Quote, to construct synthetic variants of natural coronaviruses in the lab, researchers often use a method called in vitro, that's in glass, genome assembly. The method utilizes special enzymes called restriction enzymes to generate DNA building blocks that can then be stitched back together in the correct order of the viral genome. We found that SARS-CoV-2 has the restriction site fingerprint that is typical for synthetic viruses. Our findings strongly suggest a synthetic origin of SARS-CoV-2. So isn't that fascinating? One of the people that they're talking about, maybe we should have some hidden emails on our secret back channel, would be the people who are most involved in the kind of stuff that would create lab-made viruses. Fishy, right? Another guy that was in that is this Gerald Kush guy here, and boy, does he look every bit of Kush on this. And, he's some professor of international medicine. I don't know. He's probably up to his eyeballs in USAID and CIA stuff and, NIH. Very important jobs, of course. It's very important work where you get paid well to figure out how to conduct public health policies that never actually result in any public health, usually result in a lot less public, if you catch my drift, right? So this kind of a guy. Now, remember, I covered this stuff back in 2021 when they finally FOIA'd out some of these emails, right? And this is there were a couple of them. The urgent meetings on the lab origin held January 31st, 2020. January 31st, 2020. It's pretty early in this game. Nobody even really knows what this thing is. There hasn't been a U.S. case of COVID at this point in time, or SARS-CoV-2 at the time, wasn't even named COVID at the time. But Christian Anderson writing to Fauci, to Jeremy Farrar, right? Those two, Jeremy Farrar not even being a U.S. citizen or a U.S. government person at all, him being at that time CEO of the Wellcome Trust, which is an NGO out there with a lot of money to do sort of, well, Wellcome is pharma money. It's all pharma money. So you can guess what they're up to. But yeah, Christian Anderson wrote, "Hey, Tony, the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome. That's irrelevant that it's 0.1%. PRRA, the furin cleavage site. It's only 4 amino acids. So yeah, it's a small part of the genome. But so one has to look really closely at the sequence to see that some of the features potentially look engineered." Of course it does. It was absolute smoking gun evidence that it was engineered. In fact, 8 days after this meeting was conducted, that proximal origins paper in Nature came out where they're all like, "Oh yeah, no, we couldn't have used computational power to have built this. That's not what we would have done." And it's not how it's done. Nobody does that. Nobody sets up their computer and runs it for a while and makes viruses from that. You take natural ones. You monkey with them. You put them into ferrets and mice and into all kinds of things. That's what they've been doing. And by the way, that's what they've been doing with H1N5. We didn't have any H1N5 in mammals until they started monkeying around with it in labs. There were 0 bat coronaviruses that had ever made the jump to humans until these dudes and dudettes came along, right? These people, they did this. They did this to you. They did this to us. They did it on purpose. And then instead of saying, wow, I have enough integrity to say I'm embarrassed that I effed up and I created a worldwide kind of like S show, my bad, but here's how we can make this better, right? They didn't do that. They immediately went into cover-up mode. And now we have all the smoking gun evidence we need. In fact, the only thing we have to worry about is if nothing actually happens from this, some sternly worded letters and maybe somebody loses some funding. That ain't it. We need actual perp walks on this thing, or we'll get it all over again, right? So I remember this is really important, but this was the smoking gun at the time. Remember, Fauci on February 1st, just hours after that other meeting from that prior email I just showed you, sending it to Hugh Auchincloss, one of his other right-hand men. I don't know how many right-hand men he has. He has a lot of right hands. But talking about, oh no, there's this paper by Barrick and Shi et al. In Nature from 2015, where very clearly they talked about doing exactly the sort of gain-of-function research that would result in something like the SARS-CoV-2 virus that was now circulating the globe and killing people. Now, you wonder why, Fauci's obviously a career bureaucrat. He's done a lot of really awful things. If you don't know his history on the AIDS story, you should read about it. It's dark, really dark. This guy has no soul, but he's not stupid. He's a very smart man, and he knows enough not to put too many things like this in email. And so that when he is called in to have to, give a little testimony, it sounds like this.
I have no recollection. I'm sorry, would you repeat the question? What's the question again? I'm not sure. I think, I don't recall anything from that phone call. I don't recall I may have, but I don't recall. I don't specifically remember.
Do you recall that?
I don't recall it. I don't recall this. If you show me this now and ask me the question, do you recall this? I'd have to say I don't recall. I don't recall. It's possible, but I don't recall. I'm not sure. Not specifically that I can recall. Again, that's not something that rings a bell with me that I would remember. I don't recall ever, not to my knowledge. I don't know if they did. I don't recall specifically. Again, I don't recall. It may have occurred, but I don't recall. I don't recall him saying that. I don't specifically recall. I don't recall. But I don't recall.
Texas Lindsay put that together. I found that over on X, Twitter. That's just a little fun there. So as well, we saw in this congressional memo here from David Morens, this time back again to that Gerald Kush guy there, right? Saying, hey, I forgot to clarify in my email yesterday that both my Gmail and phone calls are now safe. Text is not, as it can be FOIA'd. So you and Peter and others should be able to email me. Should email me on Gmail only. Yeah, that's constant damage control with these folks. I didn't know about Gerald Kush and what he was up to. I don't know if he's a bit player, if he was really hip deep. I don't know. I'll take a closer look at that now, obviously. But yeah, this is when you tell people that you are trying to evade things that they know are laws, right? If you said to me, "Hey, Chris, I'm trying to structure these wire payments to you to evade any reporting requirements," like, you are now, if you accept that, if you go along with this, you are actually a co-conspirator. And so I would submit, at a minimum, Gerald Kush and others are now co-conspirators within this larger framework. But for sure, this was Daszak and Fauci and Morins and all these other folks. Okay, so this is interesting. So look at this one. I think we found the FOIA lady here. So here, this is Karen Lempe. I don't know how you pronounce that, Lemp or Lempe. But this is the woman here who's very clearly part of this whole thing. So she talked about, hey, you know what? Anything to do with, can't release anything to do with EcoHealth Alliance. We're going to have to cover that up. So the FOIA lady, I would strongly suggest, is this lady right here. Yeah, Karen Lempe. So at any rate, that's a lot of fun. Now, listen, so this isn't a theory anymore, okay? No more theory time. We know for a fact that lab leak is not a theory. The preponderance of evidence is this came out of a lab. It's very, very strong. And we know that because of the genetic signatures, because of the fact that it came out of a virology lab working on these exact things. We know it because of all sorts of things, but we also know it because of the degree to which and the extent to which the players involved went to cover up that fact and throw dirt into the eyes of anybody who was looking down this path. I personally got censored for it. I know a lot of other people did as well. And that came out of that censorship industrial complex down there, which, again, the fact that Congress has to work this hard to FOIA these communications and, oh no, maybe David Morens has this stuff over in Gmail, how could we ever get to it? These people have it all. The security apparatus had all this. We know that. They had all this data. And the congressional people and journalists have to FOIA it and tease it out. So we know that there are elements in here who are protecting other elements within this. Okay, great. We have a completely corrupt system now that thinks nothing of harming you. It was all intentional as well, right? So, remember, whoopsie, the CDC drafted a vaccine-related myocarditis alert, but you know what? Oopsie, they never sent it. They never sent it. The Epoch Times reported that, quote, the CDC started receiving reports of post-vaccination myocarditis in January of 2021. Remember, that's the month it was released. Okay? So they started receiving reports right away of vaccine-induced myocarditis and either failed to detect that or ignored a safety signal for myocarditis, and the mRNA shots just rolled out, obviously. The agency also hid a warning from Israel, the country that first vaccinated young people who face the highest risk of myocarditis from COVID-19 vaccination and also the lowest risk from COVID itself. All right. So that was intentional. They didn't oopsie that. That wasn't like an email that got lost or a memo that just didn't circulate to the right desk. They actively worked to hide any and all vaccine injuries, and they overplayed the degree to which the vaccines were safe and effective, saying that they saved millions of lives. There's no evidence for that. There's none. There's literally zero evidence for that. There's some models, but you know what they say about models, garbage in, garbage out, and these models are pure garbage. As well, John Bowden, Coquin de Chien here, he's got a great book out now. This gentleman, John Bowden, he has gone out and he went right to the source. He went right to the death certificates in Massachusetts, assembled, I think, hundreds of thousands of them, and went through them all. And because of that, was able to find out that in this book, which collects all of his work, provides conclusive and irrefutable proof that Massachusetts dramatically and fraudulently inflated the COVID death count, motorcycle accident, COVID, right? While simultaneously hiding numerous COVID vaccine deaths from the public. And they also hid COVID treatment deaths in there as well. Doesn't say it in this little blurb, but that's true. And so they did that with, obviously, with remdesivir and the ventilators and other things like that. This is, obviously, it was intentional. This is what they did. So they created the virus, and whether they were professionally embarrassed or it was part of a larger plan that they then were in on covering up, I don't know what the actual story is. But if we don't get to the bottom of this, if we can't even get some level of consequence for this level of corruption, where they obviously break federal laws right in front of us and then laugh about it, right? When congressional investigators can't even get the documents they need, when the Justice Department is going to, we all know it's going to do nothing about this. What meanwhile it's going to find that Trump jaywalked or something 10 years ago and get real busy on that. We know that we have a corrupt justice system or a system of injustice. We know that we have a corrupt NIH. We know that we have a corrupt CDC. We know we have a very corrupt FDA. We know that we have a corrupt Federal Reserve. There is corruption top to bottom, which is why I think everybody watching this, you have to be aware that everything I'm revealing here about this level of corruption is a fractal snapshot of the larger corruption that's happening across the whole system. And when you have a system that's that corrupt, there's obviously an end game in play. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about with subscribers back at Peak Prosperity. We have, we got to talk about this, central bank digital currencies, where that's all going, and plus other signs that we are approaching the end game in this whole story. And let me tell you how this works. Kissinger in his 1958 PhD thesis, as well as Saul Alinsky in the Rules for Radicals, that when you are trying to effect a revolutionary takeover, so these could be communist revolutionaries, but honestly, it doesn't have to necessarily be a kinetic or violent political overthrow. Anytime you're trying to get a revolution, a new set of thinking involved, a new way of doing things, you're going to upend the status quo, whatever field that's in. But when we're talking about it at the nation state level, as Kissinger taught us, the way you do this is you have to move so fast that by the time the good-natured people who have morals and conscience and a grounding in the past, by the time they've gotten their head around number one thing that you did, you're already on number 5. They move so fast that you can't possibly keep up. So if it feels like things are going faster and faster right now, it's because they are. If it feels like they are overwhelming your ability to keep up with it, what's happening with the border, Chris? Everything still. What's going on over there in Japan's failing currency? Everything. Why are all these troops massing over here on the border in NATO? It's a thing, right? Why is Russia conducting nuclear drills now? Oh, okay, I'll talk about that. Why didn't China's busy surrounding Taiwan right now with military assets? What's that about? They're all connected things because the world is now pushing into a place where we're coming out of the old way and we're coming into some new way. And we're in that awkward period called an interregnum. Okay. And long live the king, long live the new king. We're in between kings. We're in between stories right now. It's a really uncomfortable place to be because the old king's dying, but we don't know who the new king is going to be in this story, right? Or the queen. We don't know who it's going to be. But there's some ne'er-do-well sons and daughters of the king. And so we don't, it could be really bad if it's this one. It might be better if it's this one. So we have to push hard. We can't let them get away with this stuff anymore. We just can't. I mean, if there are no consequences for this level of obvious corruption, there's no hope. There's no hope that we're going to take a better path. We're going to take a worse path, right? In order for us to get on that better path, we have to say, I'm sorry, there have to be consequences for this. Otherwise, there's no point in having laws and rules at all. Like, why should I bother stopping for stop signs or not robbing that gas station, right? Because the laws are meaningless at this stage. We're getting to that level of anarchy, and that's what's at stake. It's the whole future of the country, the whole future of the world, actually, depending on, how you look at it. So we got to do something about this. I don't know exactly what yet, except I do tell everybody, you got to get prepared. Remember, plant a garden. And it didn't have to be this way. But some people really wanted it to be this way. And they're pushing hard. And now we're starting to see the fruits, if I can put it that way, of their labor. So if you want to talk about things like this and more, come on by Peak Prosperity and become a subscriber. It will be the best money you ever spent. Now, I'd like you to become a subscriber because I want to meet you. So with that, thanks very much for listening. We'll see you next time. And please be safe. Take this stuff seriously and help spread the word.